Just a few little points before we start. So firstly, thank you very much to our sponsors, Trinity College London and Macmillan Education, for making this whole event free and possible to run indeed. So that's really good. As you will have seen, the session is being recorded. So these sessions will be available on the English UK YouTube channel at some point, either towards the end of next week or the week after that. So please look out for them if you want to watch them again. If you want to ask Wilim any questions, please you can see the chat box at the bottom. Please pop your questions in chat and Wilim will get round to the questions at some point. So without further ado, I will introduce you to Wilim Abrook. He's an online English tutor and he says he has 4,000 hours of online tuition, which is a considerable amount, which is a good range of experience in that area. And he's head of education at LearnCube. He'll tell you a little bit about LearnCube later. And he provides support and training to hundreds and thousands of online businesses. And he has, by his own admission, a magnificent moustache, but perhaps slightly less magnificent than it was a few months ago when it was even larger. So without further ado, I'll leave you to Wilim and his session, Teaching Tips for Language Nerds. Thank you, Wilim.
Oh, okay. Okay, so yeah, this moustache thing, it was glorious at one stage, and then my boss wrote it in the description of me, so I had to stick with it. Cool. So let me share my screen with you guys. Where is everyone from, by the way? You can stick it into the chat there. Just let us know. I don't know, are you guys based in the UK or internationally, and however. Okay, you guys should be able to see my screen there. Cool. So here I am in an online class. I am Irish, as you might hear, and I'm based in Portugal myself because Ireland is cold and expensive. Yeah, I've been teaching online for about 6 years. I don't know, 4,000 hours or something was that last count. We had to do something for my CV, but yeah, lots and lots of classes online. And I'm lucky enough to teach, you know, a wide range of students. I've got some kiddies, I've got some adults, I've got business students, I've got advanced beginners. But yeah, I'm definitely a self-professed language nerd, which was something I kind of shied away from at first in English language teaching, because I thought, okay, I'm teaching them how to use the language, not like the love of the language and all this. But yeah, over the years I've discovered it's been really useful and really nice, and students are actually interested in this stuff. So hang on, let me grab this. I had a presentation prepared. You guys can watch me stumble my way through it. Cool, so loads of people from Greece. Nice. Hello, everyone. All right. So yeah, online teaching tips for language nerds. It was originally online, but I chatted to Siobhan, and she mentioned that lots of teachers are offline teachers as well. So I'm sure that this stuff can be adapted. So I kind of tweaked the presentation a little bit. All right. So yeah, I've broken down into a few little areas, but I want to start with yeah, the story of my first ever online class. It must be 6 years ago. I was absolutely breaking it, and yeah, waiting for my first student. I had read through all the materials we were supposed to use in class. I had everything prepared. I was logged into the classroom maybe about 10 minutes early. And this guy, he was fantastic. I ended up having classes with Oscar for every weekday for like 2 years. He was one of my favorites. Very first class he came in, I said, okay, you know, let's start on unit 1, page 1, and we're going to do this exercise, and here we go. And he goes, no. What is the difference between to sit and to sit down? So I panicked. And yeah, it was a very frightening experience. I felt Oscar is really, he's on the autistic spectrum and really, really specific about what he wanted to do in every single class. Also unacceptable to him that I, as an English teacher, would not know the difference between sit down. So I said to him, oh, it's the same, it's just different ways of saying it. Totally unacceptable. Really, really didn't want to hear that. So yeah, I had to check. And it's something I spent 10 minutes panicking and stumbling around with Oscar, but now when something like this happens, it's a really, really quick check. And even if you're not teaching online, if you're teaching in the real world, you can just go into Google. I've got a screen share here. I mean, all you need to do is type in sit versus sit down. So, I mean, this is really rudimentary basic stuff, but it was a big blocker for me, like not using this in a class. I didn't want to admit that, you know, I don't know everything in English. I didn't want to admit that I'm leaning on another resource. But why? You've got, you know, the world's, you know, repository of knowledge, and you just use it to look at cats. But here, sit down implies motion. So that was eventually what I said to Oscar. Sit down implies motion. So, you know, sitting happens here, sitting down happens on the way. And he was kind of happy with that. But yeah, my next few years with Oscar, I had lots and lots of things I had to Google very quickly. So yeah, there's verses, the first of your three best friends here, verses, meaning, and origin. The next one is meaning. All right, so again, just Google the word and meaning. Very, very obvious, I know, but I will give you a few less obvious tips too. So chagrin, great word that someone asked me what it meant and I didn't know. And I was suitably chagrined, so chagrin meaning. And yeah, you guys all know how to Google. But the important stuff is, all right, how do I actually use this in a class? So, I mean, again, at first I shied away from using this information that you get here. But actually, if you just copy this and stick it right into your classroom, I mean, there's no shame in, you know, pretending that, or no shame and no reason to pretend that you don't know everything. So like this, I have my meaning, you know, we can give the dictionary definition, then we can explain it, then we can try and use it in some sentences. But another really, really useful thing you can do here is get your student to Google it. So get them to share their screen, or give them a list of words to Google, and you just have to teach them how to kind of use it afterwards, because there's so many cool things you can do here. So on chagrin, you can see I can click this little button here. I've got a load of synonyms for the word. I've got a load of synonyms for the verb. And also, this is really handy. If I click this little button, you guys can't hear because it's for me. It'll give me the pronunciation, which for, you know, this as an online resource for your learners to do outside school or even inside the class while you're sitting there with them is fantastic. You click on this little learn to pronounce. You can also Google how to pronounce in whatever word you want. And here I've got, okay, chagrin. It's going to give it to me, admittedly, English phonetics here, but it also gives me this little mouth. You can go slow, you can go fast. You can do correct pronunciation or the colonial pronunciation over here, even if you want, which is nice. Depends where they're learning from. I have plenty of students who are learning, you know, business English, and they are doing business with the States, so we have to teach it to them wrong. This little mouth here. All right, let's say how to pronounce slowly, or with some nice vowels. For chagrin, it's not so great, but look at this. This is going to give me a little animation that's really showing me how my mouth should be moving when I'm saying it. So again, this is a massively useful resource for your learners, and you know, don't be afraid to give them something other than you. They're going to remember you as the source for this, you know, valuable tip. All right, so like I said, there's my feeling of chagrin when I didn't understand the word. The next thing is a question I got asked in a class this week by one of my favorite students, Michaela. She is a massive language nerd like me, so we tend to have hour-long etymological rants. And the question was, why is English pronunciation? Completely accurate and fair question. We all know the answer. It was an accident, sorry. Which is the true answer, I suppose, and the only acceptable response. We should all be ashamed of ourselves. I think the word we were looking at was mortgage. So I put a little house here to remind me. So she wanted to understand, why is it mortgage and why not mortgage or mortgage? And she really couldn't understand. This girl, Michaela, she is like a C1, almost C2 speaker. And yeah, she totally gets it. Like I tell her, this is how you pronounce it, fine. She'll just do it that way and she'll hope you remember. But being able to go into the story of, okay, why is it pronounced like that, was really useful for her. So I typed in mortgage origin. And this is a fantastic little thing as well on Google. It's going to go to Oxford or wherever it pulls it from. And I've got this little diagram. So it's coming from Old French, so more, and gage. So gage is like a pledge or a promise. It's very handy that Michaela's multilingual, more so than me even. So she's fairly fluent in French. But yeah, we were able to look at this. Okay, so not only are we saying, okay, that's why you pronounce it more, not mort, because it's from French, and that made total sense. Also, then we were saying, okay, dead pledge, what does that mean? And I was saying maybe because they kill you or something, I don't know. So if you want to click here, translations and more definitions, it'll even say meaning dead pledge. So, this is really, really interesting stuff, well, for a fellow language nerd like Michaela, so we went into it, and now she has a story that she can associate with this word. The reason it's dead pledge, by the way, is the deal, the loan either dies when it's paid or when you fail to pay. So the deal is considered void, they take your house, or you finish paying. That's why. But yeah, we found that out together by Googling and by, screen sharing like this and going through everything. But again, it's this was a very specific example because I've got a C2 speaker who is also a massive language nerd like me. But the important thing is giving her that story. Okay, why do we say mortgage, not mortgage? That was really, really useful for her. And that really helped her to remember the pronunciation the next time she did it, rather than just me saying, this is the correct way, or I don't know, or like, brushing over it because I don't want to get into it. Cool. So on the next page here, I have my summary. You're not a dictionary, so don't be afraid to use Google. The purpose of a teacher, and this is, I suppose we can get, pedagogically philosophical about this. You're a teacher. The purpose is for you to facilitate learning. The purpose of your existence is to help the other person to understand and guide them through it. And we no longer live in a world where to know something, you need to know it. You guys remember that in the 90s when you would want to know something, I wonder how many cubic feet of water there are here. And you didn't just know. That was weird, but now you do know. You can immediately just Google it and it will tell you. So that's the world we're preparing our learners for. We're preparing them for a world where they can look up a word and they can find the origin, the meaning, the pronunciation, all these things. But that doesn't make you redundant. You are their kind of link to the physical, but also the sociocultural world. So you guiding them in how to use these tools, have a conversation with them about the meaning, about the origin of the word, and hopefully instilling them with a bit of the love of the language that I hope you guys all have as well. I've got some extra super handy websites here as well. They want to show you guys relate to this. So the first one is DiffSense. So I think I can open the link here. So DiffSense is really handy. Basically, you type in 2 words and it just gives you the difference. So like I said, okay, let's say principal and principal. Don't let me be the only one. I'm sure some other English teachers get confused and worried about this sometimes. Okay, so yeah. Principal is your pal in the school. So yeah, you can type in 2 words and see the difference between them. You can do phrases on this as well. Phrasal verbs work quite well. But yeah, for you, in a pinch, if you don't want to be embarrassed in class, you can secretly Google it under the table. But also for your students, this is a really, really useful resource. Wiktionary is fantastic. So Wiktionary, like Wiki Dictionary, will give you the etymology and the meaning and the pronunciation. So for each word that you can find in here, which is, it's pretty comprehensive. You've got alternative forms, etymology, where does it come from? You've got, verbs, nouns, you've got related forms. So if you are doing, for example, the reading and use of English exam questions for Cambridge exams and for the IELTS stuff as well, you can use this resource to find other forms and permutations of verbs and nouns and find their stem words and their root. So this is really, really useful for exam students, particularly at higher levels. Etymonline, like etymology online, I think they were going for a pun there, it's only okay. This one will give you really, really interesting stories. This is kind of more for you. I wouldn't use this inside a class unless you have a student like Michaela, who's a massive nerd. But this will just give you actually the history of it. So this is the interesting stuff, why we have stool and chair and other countries don't, because stool comes from stuhl, which is one without a back, which is for lower peasants, and then chair comes from chaise, which is French. It's higher up, it's fancier, because after 1066, as we all know, the Normans invaded and took over and they were the ruling class. So there you go, interesting stories like that you can learn. Again, that is let's imagine it's not Michaela, the language nerd. Let's imagine that stool chair question comes from an A2, maybe B1 student who's learning for business, they don't need to know about 1066 and, you know, Battle of Hastings and all that. But if you tell them a little bit of that story, they have something that helps them remember, and they also feel more connected culturally. And as they grow, hopefully they stick with you and, you know, pay for your kids' tuition for whatever you want to do through the amount of language class they're doing. But they go up to C1 level, you're going to have instilled in them this kind of feeling for the actual soul of the language. The more stories you have behind the language, the more cultural context you have, and the more fluent and natural you can basically be when you take the CPE for whatever reason anyone will want that exam for. Okay, so that brings me on to this thing, the story behind the phrase. So this is something for me, particularly as a nerd in languages, as someone who's really interested in etymology and that. Like I said, which is easier for your student to remember? So knock on wood or touch wood, we say. Why does that mean what it does? So it just means bring good luck or keep bad luck away when you say something, right? You could tell your student that. Or 1,000 years ago, people used to knock on wooden things to scare away bad spirits who'd listen to them and try and undo their good luck. Again, we're probably at, you want to grade your language, it depends what level the student's at. But there is a right answer to this question, what's easier for your student to remember? Unfortunately, I don't have the right answer. It really depends on your student. So if you've got a student like Oscar, don't confuse them with the story. Like this wouldn't do. He totally wouldn't accept that. But if you've got a student like Michaela, who's more interested in these things and crucially, who remembers things by stories and she associates things with stories, you can usually tell these students, okay, so how do I tell? If a student wants to create lists of words and learn them off by heart, you know, it's kind of an old-fashioned way of learning, but hey, it works for some people. My mother-in-law is ridiculous like this. She's like a, you know, school girl on September 1st whenever she's trying to learn something. She has all her pencils in a row. But I am more like Michaela, the other student. I need to have a story or I need to have an understanding of something. And those are the students usually where classes devolve into conversations and you completely digress and get off the point. So yeah, if it's one of those students who talks a lot about weird things, you mention something in an exercise and they say, oh, my aunt had one of those and blah, 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 blah. This is a student who's going to react really well to stories. So yeah, you know, by the way, if you want to know, and this is a massive digression I'm going to indulge myself with, because normally I teach teachers how to use software for teaching, and I don't get to teach English as much these days. Knock on wood, touch wood, right? Where that comes from, I'm sure you all know. I don't need to tell you. It comes from, you know, spirits in the trees. So you would either touch the tree to like let them know that you're there because they're happy spirits, or if you believe there were bad spirits, you would knock on the tree and that would kind of scare them away. So now I'm safe. Those mischievous spirits have gone away and I can say something. But why? Why do we have that? So if you want to go back further, I've got an enormous book on mythology and folklore written here, which is great. Right, you've got the Celts, the original Britons, and then, you know, we have the Iron Age. Oh no, wasn't it? It was the Iron Age Celts coming over and the Britons who were native inhabitants before there. So the Iron Age guys come over, they take over the land, they kick everyone out, and there's this kind of guerrilla war going on for 100 years or so, where these ancient Britons are living in the trees, living in the forest amongst the trees. And they came out of the woods and they would take people and kill them and, you know, abduct your children and so on. So there was this fear of the bad spirits of the woods. You know, we've all seen like, I don't know, Avatar or all these movies that are supposedly spiritually woke, where you've got, you know, these tree-loving hippies who are more wise than us and so on. So what defeats, you know, the wood, as in the wood-living people, is iron, the iron weapons. That's how we defeated them. And that cultural knowledge is passed on phrasally. And that's why we say touch wood, and that is why the Italians, for a similar reason, say toccando ferro, because for them it's touch iron. So you're touching the iron thing, which saves you from the bad spirits in the wood. So yeah, thanks for indulging me there. I hope I didn't lose too many of you during that. I've got a couple of websites again that are useful for you guys. So phrases.org.uk. So hang on, let me open it up. So basically, yeah, this is really handy. It's got like really, really detailed history. If you actually want to find a specific phrase, and there's loads of different, this is giving you a slightly different version. It gives you different options of my story. But yeah, it's really, really complete and it gives you really detailed information. But the searching thing on this is really bad. It's a quite difficult website to use. It's like through a Google search and it's not great. So I actually don't recommend this for students because it's hard to use. The one I recommend for students is the idioms, which is just theidioms.com. It boasts of being the most complete, the largest idioms dictionary. I don't know that it is because it doesn't have some stuff the other one does, but this one's super, super easy to use. So yeah, for students, you can kind of quite easily search for idioms and find them. And yeah, it's nice, particularly for those B2, C1 students, again, who are trying to flesh out their vocabulary for exams, particularly, or just for day-to-day use. They want to sound fancy. So going back to Tocando Ferro, there is a really, really nice thing you could do with your students who I assume don't already speak English, or why would they be, you know, in your class? It's trading idioms and trading phrases and like, you know, trading languages basically. So this is something a lot of people kind of shy away from. For example, you know, I'm learning Italian, so I want to ask my Italian students to explain things all the time. And I think, oh no, I shouldn't do this because I'm supposed to be teaching them. But it can actually be of great benefit to your students to explain things for a number of different reasons. I mean, one thing is if your student is explaining things to you, they have to use the correct vocabulary to get a point across. Also, when we're translating, I mean, we can just translate directly with Google or whatever, but if you are trying to find the appropriate translation, particularly for an idiom or phrase, you need to find one that has the same feel, one that has the same essence, rather than just the direct, okay, chair means this, you know. So having them think about it and having them associate this phrase with another phrase that's similar but almost the same, but is it the same? That kind of conversation is going to ingrain it into their head in a different way. Even the students like Oscar who have to think of, you know, who are very direct and they don't react well to this storytelling approach. But those students are going to retain information, in my experience, quite well if they have had to think about it and if they have had to kind of process it a little bit with you. Also, you'll find people are really happy to share their languages with you as well. So let's go on to you can't have your cake and eat it too. This phrase makes absolutely no sense. As you all know, it confused me for years and years and years. I'm sure one or two of you are saying, oh, this is from, you know, Thomas of Norfolk's letter to Thomas Cromwell. Would you both eat your cake and have your cake? But the answer to that is yes. Yes, of course. Of course, if I have my cake, I'm going to eat my cake. Why else would I have my cake? And yeah, I'm sorry to say this plagued me until about a year ago. When I did that whole origin thing with Michaela, the one student, and we really looked into it, and we figured out it has a kind of a sister idiom in Italian. So non si può voler la botte pieno e la moglie ubbiaccia, I think. So does anyone speak Italian? You might already be laughing, but yeah, in Italian, the equivalent is it's not possible to have a full barrel and a drunk wife. So the phrase should be in English, you can't eat your cake and still have it too. So yeah, that little phrase there, I will use with, so I'll use this Italian phrase with my French-speaking students and with my Spanish-speaking students, German-speaking students, so on, even though they don't speak the language or, you know, have any interest maybe in Italian. But this phrase is a much better phrase than the English one, and it has the same meaning. And then we will start this whole journey, and you can make a formalized exercise out of it. Sometimes I'll do this. I'll get a few really common idioms. There's no place like home, things like that. Ubriaca. Okay, thank you, Rebecca. So you see, even in this presentation, I'm learning my Italian. But yeah, people love sharing languages, and if you show the same joy for it, if you show the same kind of nerdiness for languages, your students are going to get inspired by that. It rubs off. It's super contagious. So yeah, I mean, I could go on, but I'm just going to basically teach a lot of English teachers about some English idioms. I'm sure you guys know, but the important thing to take away here is, okay, what's the approach that I'm going to use in class? So the approach is, I'm going to ask you to share a phrase, or I'm going to explain this phrase. We're going to talk about it. We're going to use it. We're going to look at some examples, but then what is the equivalent in your language? What do you guys say? Do you have a phrase that means the same? And it's even better when they don't have one that means exactly the same, because then first of all, okay, you've got to make one up. you've got to kind of work with me. Let's directly translate it, but then let's make it make sense culturally. That can be really interesting. Or also, are there similar phrases? And then you go down this rabbit hole. Be careful. If you're like me, you will ramble and you will run out of time very quickly. But yeah, you can kind of ride the rabbit hole out, and you know, within your allotted time that you've set aside, and you can find some really, really nice phrases. Students are often, particularly my younger students, actually, you know, my preteens, the little kiddies, they are delighted to be teaching the teacher something. I don't know, I think it's a novelty for them. But then they retain that because they think it's, and if you can remember the phrase they taught you in the last class, then they're going to have to prove that they remember the phrase that you taught them. So all around very useful. Again, I've got phrases and the idioms, these 2 pages. I think I was going to try and find different ones, but these are the best 2 for this purpose, this task. All right, guys, so we're going to the last section. Looks like I'm roughly on time. Hopefully I haven't lost loads and loads of people to boredom. But yeah, poetic metering, so poetry and using poetry in classes. So poetry is something you learn in English classes if you're a native speaker, right? Like poetry and prose and this kind of stuff. Prose is the only reason I actually don't recommend it for English classes. Prose tends to be very long. But, you know, again, CPE level, maybe you've got some students, but who has any? I don't know if any of you guys have any C2 level students. I have 1. But yeah, it's rare enough. So prose is usually too long. But the perception is that poetry is for C1, C2 students only. It's too difficult. The themes are too complex, strange sentence structure. You've got, like, you know, phrases chopped up and moved around to kind of fit a rhyming structure or whatever. Students don't find it interesting because they're all playing their PlayStations. Vocabulary is either too advanced, so, you know, you're using lots of weird words, and also, you know, all this simile metaphorical stuff where you're using a word, but it doesn't mean what you think it means. And do you think you know what it means? No, you don't, because you culturally don't understand. Or it's archaic, so it's Shakespeare, which is decent, but I don't know, overrated. And the most important point everyone makes is this is useless. And why are you teaching the poetry? Why would we do a class on poetry? They need to learn how to go to the bank and so on. So I wanted to attempt to debunk all of this stuff. My contention is that poetry is not for C1, C2 students only. Poetry is really, really useful, both in being creative and being a beautiful aspect of the language that hopefully inspires some kind of lifelong love of English in them, but also it's got some really practical functions. So the themes are often too complex. For who? This is one of those things I realized that at a young age, like, I sound so stupid when I speak Portuguese. I sound so bad because I cannot express myself well. But yeah, this means I find it difficult to express complicated things. But if I take my time at, you know, Pessoa or whatever, I could get it. I need someone there with me to explain the cultural significance of some things. But hey, when I do, I'm delighted with myself, and I'll, you know, quote poetry lines to Portuguese people who've never read it and think I'm obnoxious. So yeah, the themes are not too complex. These are human themes, hopefully. If it's bad poetry, maybe not. Strange sentence structure breeds bad habits. This one you've got to be careful with, yeah, of course. But, you know, students understand that poetry is different. Like, if we're doing a poetry class, I'm not presenting this as standard language. This is a poem. This is a weird creative thing that we're going to look at together. They are actually understanding more about how you flex the language and break the rules and change the rules of the language. This is really useful. This is a lot of grammatical. I didn't put any grammar stuff in here because I only had 45 minutes and not a million hours, but difference between English grammar and Romance language grammar, particularly, you know, Eastern grammar, is really, really interesting. And those restrictions can be bent in certain ways. Having a feel for how those restrictions are bent, whether it's an advanced student who is actually thinking about this and talking about this with you, or whether it's a lower level student, let's say for poetry, we're talking like high A2 at the very, very lowest, but, you know, B1 student, you're instilling in them an understanding of how the language can be manipulated. So there are certain poets and certain poems that are really useful for that. And it's all about that long-term goal. You know, learning a language is long-term, but often lifelong. And if you can, from the start, bring in these, manipulations, then you're going to set them up to understand and speak in a much more fluent native way later on. Students don't find it interesting is another thing. Nah, they do. Trust me, they just do. Some students don't find it interesting. And if they don't find it interesting, maybe don't do poetry with that. But, if you force them a little bit and you pick the right poem and the right poet, they will. Vocabulary is too advanced or too archaic. I don't know, yes, vocabulary can be too advanced. Obviously, we've got to grade the level of the poet. If I'm dealing with a kid who is an A2 or B1 speaker, maybe, and they're shy, maybe let's do some limericks, there was a lady from Ballinasloe, this kind of stuff. Those are still really, really useful. If I'm dealing with, an adult who is interested in these things, maybe they will just pick up one or two weird words from it. If there are archaic words in there, fine, but just make sure you note that they're archaic. This is a weird way of saying it. And it won't help them with day-to-day English. Okay, this is my interesting one. So first of all, poetry is rhythmic, right? So we've got a massive advantage here with pronunciation. So you can use these as pronunciation tools, like tongue twisters. Poetry also, particularly older poetry, it's less freeform, is rigid and rhythmic because that helps you to remember it, because poetry comes from this idea of bailogis, or, what you call it in English, like mouth knowledge. Yeah, mouth knowledge. Passing the folklore, passing things down from person to person. It wasn't written down, it was passed, by word of mouth. So you have to remember them. And if it rhymes and has a structure, you can remember it. So your students can remember it too. Short little poems that they can learn off. They can feel fancy. I certainly feel fancy when I'm, quoting French poetry or whatever, remembering French poetry if I can. Another thing then is that, those rules I talked about before, this is a trickle-down effect, I suppose, but the way in which you play with a language is visible. It's very difficult for me to explain to you, okay, this is the rule and this is how it's being bent or played with. It's very difficult for a student to think, how exactly is this rule being bent and played with? But it is much easier than you think, particularly for kiddies, to pick up on how the rule is, being manipulated. People pick up on this instinctively. Very, very small children who are too young for poetry learn by listening to their parents. And if you've got any preteens, there is another boost of brain growth at about that pre-puberty, early puberty stage. This is just brain science now. Kiddies have like a boost of growth in their brains. That's why if you are learning a language, the best thing you could do is to be 12. Around that age, they have a very similar capacity to pick things up, and they pick up conceptually. So they're not just picking up by reading a list and learning off like we used to do when we were all kids in school, but they're actually picking up on the form and the structure. That's why kids who play games and who are shouting at Americans while they shoot them in the Fortnite or whatever it is these days, they usually speak really, really well because they're used to actually doing it and hearing it and picking it up naturally. All right, so all that I just wrote down pronunciation. But let's look at some examples that you can use in class. So if we're looking for rhyme and assonance, We Real Cool, hang on, I can open it here. So We Real Cool is a really, really nice one. It's short. It's by Gwendolyn Brooks, and it's not immediately about, abortion and racism and all these things and the reasons that we love Gwendolyn Brooks, but, maybe aren't great for teaching a politically neutral class, which is what we want to do. But this one here is really, really short. The rhyming pattern is fantastic. It's got, really nice structure, and it's got a nice rhyming structure. So this is one you can learn easily, and this is great for teaching assonance because you've got lurk, late, strike, straight, sing, sin, thin, gin, jazz, tune, all of these like vowel sounds. Getting students, even quite young students who maybe don't know what they're speaking about, they'll like this poem because it just goes boom, 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 and it's got some weird sounds, and you can really make them enunciate, and it's short enough that we can do that in a class without boring everyone. All right, so Daffodils. I wandered lonely as a cloud. Everyone knows this one. All right, so this one here, maybe zoom in again. So everyone knows it. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on higher vales and hills. Da 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 da. So it's an iambic tetrameter, which means that it goes da 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 da. And that is the really, really useful stuff that, you know, Gwendolyn Brooks is not great for because she's too modern, but older poetry particularly sticks to very solid meter. And what you've got here is, this is constructed, this isn't just written, this is constructed to this meter so that the iambic structure fits, or no, so that the word stress fits the iambic structure. That means that all of these words, not only your student is learning a little song that they can sing, but they're also learning that it must fit this rhythm, which means they're naturally having to pronounce the words in the correct way. And they're putting the word stress in the correct position. Again, great for, you know, just an exercise on word stress. It helps them with it. It's more fun. It's less boring than counting syllables. But also, students are picking up on these. You do a few like simple poems, drop them into classes every now and again, and get your students to recite them, work on them together, do that whole boring teacher thing. Come on, let's all do it together. And they will start to pick up naturally the feeling of the word stress in English. Also, I like this one because at the very, very first little stanza here, we've got a you know, closed gap exercise. So even with younger students, this is an example of those archaic phrases or overly poetic phrases. Or, so what is this? This is a weird phrase. This is a weird word. You've not seen it before. So I'll explain to them that there's a missing letter. What is it? And then suddenly they're thinking, and it's become a vocabulary exercise. And they need to figure floats high, and they might figure it out. B1-ish, B1 plus, which is what I call, I don't know if you guys use that B1, B1 plus, B2, but yeah, high B1 will be able to do this usually. But yeah, there's a few poems you could do this. Also, you can take away words, all right? Take this word away and then ask them to replace it with any word, not the correct word, but it must fit the rhyming pattern. So they can, suddenly they're thinking through all their vocabulary of a word that rhymes with breeze, and they've got to fit a word in there. It can be quite funny, particularly young kiddies and like, you know, nursery rhymes or poems like that. You know, we can have some funny examples. And the last one, if you'll indulge me, is Robert Frost, who managed to be a great a great poet, despite being American. And he has a really lovely one, which I've used before. Hang on, let me stick it into the screen share here so we can see it. I can write on it. But yeah, so Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. This one has a very, very solid like structure to it. So again, we've got that same thing, the rhythm, you know, whose woods are these? I think I know. Da, 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 da. But it's also got a very, very solid rhyming structure. So, you know, all right, let's draw it in. I've got no, though, snow, here, queer, near, here. So you've got this structure that's repeated the whole way through, and you get your students to kind of look at it. And if it's someone, again, who's nerdy and who's actually interested in these kind of things, the rhyming structure here is broken. And it's broken on this last stanza. And the point in which it's broken is just here. At the end of this line, we should switch to a different, you know, a different sound, a different rhyme. But we don't. We continue. And at the same time, we break the meter. So instead of, but I have promises to keep, no, it's but I have promises to keep. And then this is something you can explain. This is something I've done before, but you're breaking that iambic structure. And when you break the iambic structure, you also break the rhyming structure. And this is why people like Robert Frost. But yeah, this is a nice poem. There's a few other things like this. You know, I'm sure you guys all have your favorite poets and so on, or you can find things like this. But having a poem and examining the rhyming structure, not just for which words rhyme and which sounds sound the same, you know, that's great. And definitely do that, particularly with lower level students. But if you actually really, really want to engage a student and make them excited about English, do a poem. I would do this, like this specific thing about the structure of da, 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 being broken. And then suddenly all hell breaks loose down here and our rhyming structure is broken as well. That's a really lovely thing that you don't need to be an advanced English speaker to understand. You do probably need to be like a teenager. I think kiddies will struggle with it. They just like the sounds. But yeah, there's some really interesting things you could do there. So you guys have indulged me for quite a long while talking about poetry and other things that I'm not sure has been much use to it. I really hope that you've gotten some kind of insights out of this. The basic message of this can be summed up is that if you really love languages, particularly English, if you're teaching, don't be afraid to actually put that through in your class. You're not just teaching, you know, structural and useful language. You're teaching the whole sociocultural concept. Cool. So that's about me. I have at the very end this little page. So I am the head of education for LearnCube. If any of you guys are teaching online, you can go to learncube.com. It's an online teaching platform, which is this classroom. And yeah, it's wonderful. I like it. I've been using it for years. So go check it out. Also, if you are thinking of teaching online, or you are looking for students to teach, we've got a site called Get More Students. So www.getmorestudents.org. You can go there. It's totally free to sign up, and it's just got lots of marketing resources for helping you to get more students. Okay, so that's me. I don't know if anyone's got any questions on that.
Yeah, please pop your questions into the chat box if you've got them, or you can speak. So put your camera on and unmute yourselves, and you can ask a question verbally as well, as you wish.
Cool. I don't know. Maybe everyone's asleep.
I think that's a fascinating talk, actually, William, and I like your idea that there are different students who would do different, respond to different types of approaches, and so you can mix and match them a little bit. Some people might want more of a narrative, other people wouldn't necessarily want that, but will want a sort of definitive type of definition of different things. So it comes down to individual learner differences, doesn't it? I think, and the sort of choice of topics and how you go into things,
Well, this, the one thing that is archaic is this idea of the teacher as the font of knowledge. You're not anymore. Like, people don't need to remember stuff. I was told in school, you need to learn your maths because you won't have a calculator in your pocket, and I always do. So what your job now is more of a guide. So you can choose how to present them information. Choose, okay, what way am I going to help you remember? And once you figure that out, then you've got them. Getting students to write their own poems. We got a question here from David. So how do you look at students write their own poems? Yes. And actually, with my adult learners, if like an adult learner who is interested, you can get them to do kind of creative writing, like write short stories and stuff. They tend to shy away from poems. Little kids love writing poems. The main thing is that, you got to really set them up with a rhyming structure, because just get them to write any poem and it'll be nonsense. But if you can give them a structure to work from, or give them a first line and then the next 3 lines have to be this many words and this many syllables, it's really, really useful. It really stretches their imaginations and gets them to think a lot about the vocab. Cool.
Great. Okay. Anyone got any more questions? Please pop them in. Just some thank yous.
That's good, yeah.
It's good to have those.
Yeah, I know everyone hasn't just wandered off and been
from one nerd to another. Grazie mille.
Cool. De nada.
And you've got Ubriaca as well, so you've got that to take away with you.
Cool, nice, yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks very much, William. That's a wonderful session.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, guys.
Lots of good ideas there. So see you soon for the next one. It's Simon Dunton at 3:15 if you want to tune in for that one. Thank you.
Cool. See you guys. Thanks for tuning in.